timer on. I'm going to try to save a little bit of time. And I want to tell you about what I do and what the WISE project has offered us. And it's about nowcasting of well-being. So why nowcast well-being? Well, obviously, well-being is the ultimate goal. Any country has to increase well-being. So the point is, we have to measure. And if we even look at what Stiglitz and Futasi said is, what we measure shapes what we strive for. Wrong measures make us strive for the wrong things. So these are the fathers of beyond GDP. So definitely we have to measure accurately, make sure that we are measuring well-being. And if we look at somebody that I love, Peter Drucker, is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. We want to increase well-being, but we at least need to know that the well-being is at 5 and we want to get it to 7. So we need to measure it. Now, I hope a lot of our audience today knows what subjective well-being, but just to clarify, so what we're speaking about today is subjective well-being, so it's a measure where you give your opinion on your opinion about well-being. And roughly we can split it into 2 legs. The one is evaluative or cognitive, and that's where you give an evaluation of your life. How satisfied are you with your life in general? Or Cantrell ladder, where we have the worst and the best possible life you can imagine, and on which step of the ladder you are. And then we also have experienced well-being. Now, experienced well-being is more about the emotional side. It will be positive emotions, negative emotions, and maybe a balance of that, which gives us happiness. So for today, I will concentrate on experienced happiness. So just to look at experienced happiness. Now, mostly when we analyze data, it will be on the subjective well-being or the cognitive side. Here, I just bring in the absolute importance of experienced well-being. So the emotional side of well-being. What we see is there will be an event. That event can be shock. For example, it can be COVID lockdowns or the starting of the Ukraine war or something that happens in Iran. And that has the effect right through the economy. And it will have a collective sentimental effect on a country. So we look at that collective emotion, and that collective emotion leads to a certain reaction. It can either be, we've seen in South Africa protests where people actually die because they're so mad about something that happened. We can see the joy of a soccer game. We can see the effect of elections. So something we can monitor the mood on the ground as it happens. Also, if your policy is there to increase the positivity of a community, because they can see what is it like at the moment, or if they say something, what is the reaction, we find that a positive community is more productive, they're healthier, is a stronger social support, so cohesiveness, they are more innovative, high creativity, and for South Africa, obviously a very important part, lower crime rates. So what I'm saying is measuring experience well-being is really something we should do. Now, the opposite, so what we do is we measure it in real time. And for that, we use big data. Big data, you will know, is not just social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Big data can be a matrix of a bank with thousands of columns and thousands of rows, too big to handle in an Excel spreadsheet. But if we look at surveys, and we first start with the limitations, why not surveys? The problem is you have to get the information together, and normally there's a delay about 1 or 2 years before we can actually see what did people say. And the frequency is once a year if we're happy. Sometimes it's less, it's every second year, according to the waves. Then we have found recall bias from people answering and desirability bias. So you don't always know the answers that you get, are they the true answers? It's very expensive. All the surveys are really expensive. And it's limited in scale. I mean, you can't ask the whole population anything. So that's our limitations of surveys. I must say we can't go without surveys because that is what we use as a true measure and which we use for our predictions. So please don't stop surveys. And if you can, we would like more. Then, as I've already mentioned about big data, there's a few benefits of big data. We can extract big data near real time. So we can almost tell in the moment what's happening, especially in the mood of a nation. It is, if we look at it, it's continuous. We can extract data continuously and see what happens continuously. It is behavioral based. So nobody knows actually that we are watching the social media, especially at the moment where we check on Google searches. Nobody thinks that if they search something, that somebody might look at this and include it in data. So they can say anything on searches where if you had Facebook, Instagram, it might have been a little bit different. The data is free, it is scalable, it's low cost, so scalable means it can cover different regions, different areas, and it can also be granular. It's specific to a certain time period as you extract the data and on a certain geographical area on a specific topic. So there's many benefits of big data. Once again, we can't only use big data, we need the survey as a validation method. Then just prior research using this type of data, big data, to estimate happiness, there has been a few. And the fathers of this, I will say, is Stotts and Danford with their odometer. It was a Twitter-based well-being measure. It only looked at English tweets, and it had a continuous running of what happened to the happiness. We also had a Twitter-based index, the Greyling and Rousseau Gross National Happiness Index, which also was a continuous measure of happiness. It differed a little bit from the odometer because we use lexicons, natural language processing. But all of this came to an end when my lovely Elon Musk, which is also a South African, decided no more academic projects for Twitter, and it was stopped very abruptly. So we had to start moving on to something else. We were now already used to this luxury of real-time estimation of experienced happiness, and we started moving and looking into various things. We were not the only ones. We have Algan et al. That looked at subjective well-being, but you will remember that the cognitive side of it, it's got a longer time span, and they estimated using Google Trends. Then we have Merton and Solomon, also now casting average subjective well-being across the OECD. By the way, the work they've done is excellent. I hope I meet them in person and we can put our minds together and see what we can really create, leading to something more than what we're doing now. What is the specific contribution of the research we're doing at the moment? We've got a close to near real-time estimation of what's happening on country level to the emotions of the people. So it's a measure of the mood, what's happening to the mood. We display it continuously on a dashboard. You will see it on gnh.today. If you open it, you will see at the moment we've got 16 countries. We would like to include more. We will have more dashboards. And the ideal is to measure it for as many countries as possible, maybe all the countries included in the OECD. And then obviously, here on the global south, we need data. So Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, to include the data. And then what is really nice about it, you can generalize it. So what methods we create, estimations, we find equations, we have now proof that it can be generalized to other countries, smaller areas, and different time zones. So just the data methodology, and now explaining when we started. This was our first concepts, so I'm going to start there. And what we used as our primary data set was we extracted data from Google researchers, and Google is very kind to us. They've got Google Trends where we can extract data from. Not as easy as you think because they index whatever they have. So we started looking just for emotion words. We looked at panas, various of the PANAs, so positive effect, negative effect scales. We looked at certain libraries, we looked at certain lexicons, and we collected all the emotion words we could possibly find. And at the end came up with 69 of those words. Then we ran correlations, and just to mention, I'm now going a little bit ahead, but the one with the ONS, the UK Statistical Office, ran through COVID times. They collected experienced well-being, so happiness, but on a weekly basis, high frequency. And that's what we need, because we need something against which we can predict our happiness, build a model, train a model. So we used that. And so what we got is we extracted the words, the 69 words, and we had to do it on a weekly basis to match the ONS office. And what we got from the ONS was a time period, and it was running from 2020 to 2023. So that's what we matched with our extraction from Google Trends. We extracted the 69 words, and then what we did first is we ran, why we use Google Trends, it is continuous. It captures information-seeking behavior, different to social media a little bit. The terms that we include is positive, negative, and the effects around it. And this is all that we got from PANAS, for example. So we will, in happiness, have positive and negative effect. And it's all based on search data, so it's unobtrusive and actually really very objective. So as a true measure, we always need a survey measure. In this case, we use the ONS data. It is a weekly UK survey. Nowadays, it's every second week, but still so helpful. One of the few that have high frequency data. It's publicly available. For this estimations, we had 196 observations from the 5th of January to October 2023. For inner econometrics estimation, or machine learning as we use, we know 196 is still a small sample. We would have liked more, but this is what we have. Includers are adults age 16 and more. And then what we also have is, this is our true happiness against which we estimate, and all of it is surprisingly in English, coming from the UK. To test this, we had we were now looking for high frequency data sets. So just to see if it's transferable to another language, we got Dutch time use data, which is nice because you can aggregate it per day and you can have daily data. Martijn was so kind to get this data set for us, and it spans 2011 to 2021. So this was an additional test we did, just to see if we can transfer this method to a different language, if it just means that we can get cross-country equations. I'm out of my 15 minutes. Let's rush through this. So how do we do it? We use XGBoost. So this is a machine learning model. I'm not going to go into details. It's a tree-based model, which means you can chuck in anything. That multicollinearity and things doesn't count. And we use that to rank the importance of the words. To actually get coefficients on the estimations, we use ElasticNet. It's a linear estimation method. And it's very nice because it's got certain penalties built in for overfitting. It costs your reach penalties, for example, and you can put in highly correlated, which we call in machine learning features, and we use that to get a weight for each of those words, and the weights we use then to construct our equation. So it's a coefficient that we use as well. So let's go to the results. I'm quickly going to the results, and maybe this is terminology that you don't know, but the metrics we use to see how good is the model is a root mean square error. There's a few others, but the root mean square error just tells you how small is the difference between the true happiness and the estimated or predicted happiness, and you want to get it as small as possible. So if you look at the root mean square error, is actually in the same scale as your outcome variable, which in this case is true happiness on 0 to 10. So if you see an error of 0.113, is very small. They're very closely related. So that was our XGBoost. XGBoost was to rank the importance of words. Elastic Net was actually to derive the weights, and you can see it's also got a very small root mean square error. And then what we do is we derive the equation and we match it to the true happiness to see what is the difference between the two. For England, we find a small root mean square of 0.094, and you can see the equation and the fit. Sometimes it's got a hiccup. It's where something like COVID happens. So you will see, but this is then what we use in the future for our estimations. Yeah, I'm not going to rush through. This is all just various robustness checks, and you can see we've got relatively high R scores. Ears measure something different, but not too bad, was significant. Then we use exactly the same method we use for the UK, but we use it for Dutch, CET, and we added some country-specific words. And if you look at that, you will see your RMSE square initially was 0.08, and then we added some words like famous, country-specific words, and we brought it down to 0.05. All right, so here's the real-time application just to show you what we do. And I hope Joel is still here. There you can see yesterday evening's
I am here. I am here,
Joel,
Talita.
can you see this? Apparently, Argentina is really, really happy. I opened up the GNH today. This is our dashboard, and I saw Argentina. And just to show you Argentina here, I did a graph just of Argentina. And if you look at their mean happiness is 5.59, it's that line. Yesterday evening, and for them it's their daytime, it went up to 9.29. I know they say their religion is soccer. Here we can see it. It is 4 standard deviations above the mean. It's such an outlier, I've never seen it. I can just tell you that Argentinians is behind themselves with happiness. I decided not to show you what happened in the UK because I've got so many UK friends and I don't want to cause unhappiness for them. Just to show you that this also applies to political situations or economic situations. This was the day tariffs were announced by Donald Trump. Here's the happiness in USA. You can see it drop. And just for a robustness check, we have the VIX, it's a fear index, and you can see how the fear increased in the USA. Quickly, a few other soccer. Spain versus France, a surprise win. You can see this is what happened in Spain. And you can see that is what happened in France. Very often we see the drop or a surprise exit out of the game having a bigger effect than a surprise win. Surprise win means that advance is not the final yet. Then what are we all further? We are working on this research continuously. We have now stopped using just words, but topics. Topics means we extract, the word is there, but it's a wider concept. Previously, we had to translate all the words to the native language. Fortunately, here, Google Trends will do it for us. And we find it is a better equalized way to estimate it. So our current estimations are on topics and not words. And then conclusions, we prove a concept, we've seen it work. And I always say the best way to see it work is like with the soccer. If you see what happens on the floor and it actually happens in your index. Is there policy value? Yes, for sure. Policy needs to know what happens in events because they know the mood and they can adjust their policy accordingly. Next steps, we are improving these estimations continuously. And that is it.
And time slot 4 questions. So please make sure to post your questions. I think we're going to move over now to our distinguished panel of discussants, which will have 10 minutes to discuss. I know we are running a bit behind schedule, so I would like to ask the discussant to please be prompt within the 10 minutes, and then we'll hopefully have some time for a Q&A session, a brief Q&A session afterwards. First off is Professor Arthur Grimes from the Professor of Wellbeing and Public Policy at Victoria University of Wellington, Senior Fellow at Matu Economic and Public Policy Research, and former Chair of Reserve Bank of New Zealand, joining us this evening. Thank you, Arthur. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Fred, and thanks, Talita and Martijn. It's a real delight for me to be here. I've never been to Johannesburg, but my parents were actually born and raised there and left there in the late 1940s, so this is the closest I've been. Also, thank you to both of the presenters presenting data. I love data. I love people making data available, and for the rest of us, it's a public good. As we know, as economists, it should be free, it should be available, and doing these exercises is absolutely wonderful. Thank you for making them available. I'm going to first have a few comments about Talita's presentation and then a few about Martijn's. Talita, I've read through the paper, fascinating. I just had a couple of real just interesting thoughts. One is whether words mean the same to different people. I'm thinking about a word like bad, which might mean very good in African American language, and it might mean not very good in my language. So whether words mean different things to different groups and how you might deal with that. And also cultural differences more broadly. We know, for instance, in the evaluative well-being literature that people, for instance, in countries like Japan are less likely to say that they're very, very happy because that's not seen to be the right, the most appropriate way of describing oneself. And I wonder whether you see any similar sorts of cultural differences in the in this approach, in the real-time happiness approach. A related issue, perhaps, is whether the estimated happiness from your approach is more or less volatile than the surveyed happiness. I think that would be very interesting to see. And I wondered whether you had done any correlations across countries. Clearly the UK, or clearly England and Argentina will be negatively correlated today, but I'd be interested to know whether you've looked at correlations and what drives perhaps correlations across countries. And then the final issue that I wanted to raise was, so this is real-time happiness. Who's going to use them? And wearing my old policy hat now. When I was a central banker, we wanted real-time measures of inflation, etc. Real central banks are going down this route very fast. Here I was wondering, imagine it's politicians and officials seeing what delivers real-time happiness. It's likely to be populist solutions that suddenly spark a nerve and get lots of essentially likes, similar sorts of things. And whether people who are politicians and officials who are looking at real-time happiness might be actually encouraged to follow more populist policies than they have done in the past, and whether that could lead to a long-term decline in happiness if the populists start making use of these real-time measures. So that's something I'd like you to comment on later. Martijn, with Talita, thank you so much for doing the work you've done and making it publicly available. I did have a question as to whether it was accessible at the moment. I think you said it would be there in a few days' time, so hopefully that will be right. I noticed, and I've come across this issue myself, you've got a mixture of different scales, 1 to 10, 0 to 10, they're pretty close, they're not too bad, and 1 to 4. And clearly that's very different. And I wondered whether you'd done any sensitivity testing if you left out the 1 to 4 scales and just tried to get the other ones together, whether that would make any difference, because 1 to 4 is very different and could throw things out, or maybe make things less volatile by having 1 to 4. I don't know. You discussed the importance of thinking about which of your series we use for different purposes. If we're using dynamics, we would want not to use the smoothed series, I think, if we're looking at dynamics over time. Also, I don't think you mentioned in your presentations, but you also have a third series where you borrow across regions. And so again, I think if we were looking at regional correlations, we wouldn't want to use the series that borrows across regions, because that would artificially introduce some correlations there. So that's just for people to be aware of, but you deal with that in the paper. One issue about which I thought you might want to think about when you put the data up, and whether it's possible for the issue of volatility and the small numbers sometimes, is put up the number of observations for each region for each region quarter that you have. Is it quarter or year? But anyway, for each data point, have the number of observations. That way, that would allow the user to use particular weighting systems that they think is appropriate, rather than relying on your particular way of looking at that. So I'd love to see that released along with the data. So again, thank you to you both. I'm a data nerd. I love seeing data. Places like the OECD puts the PISA data up for us all to use, and we can use it. You've both done a great job. So thank you very much. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you very much. Just a quick one. We're just jumping to our next discussant. Thank you very much, Arthur. And we would just like to introduce Professor Paul Dolan from Professor of Behavioral Science at the London School of Economics, author of Happiness by Design and of the Wellbeing Questions Used for the UK's Office for National Statistics. Paul, over to you. I know time is running out, so thank you very much for taking time.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. I'm so glad that Talia didn't put the English happiness up from this morning, because I can't express how painful it is after being beaten by Argentina last night, of all teams to lose to in the manner in which we did. And so I think that's really significant and important, because those effects are real. And I do think sometimes academics and policymakers are, I don't know, underestimating the significance of how people feel moment to moment in their appraisal of policies. Of course, lives go well in myriad ways, and evaluative measures give us useful insights into how people think about their lives when they reflect on them. But I wonder, if I was reporting a life satisfaction score right now, whether it would be affected by the pain that I'm experiencing from England getting beat last night. Certainly, if I was filling out a Cantrell ladder, almost certainly not. And so, whilst all of these measures, I think, provide us with useful information, I think we need to be clear about some of the category confusion that we have in these measures, because it would be my strong suggestion that particularly Cantrell ladders, to some degree life satisfaction, are actually more aligned with more of the old preference satisfaction account of welfare used in economics than the mental state account, which subjective wellbeing measures are in principle designed to tap into. So I'd just like us to be clearer about what the measures are measuring and what we reserve the word subjective wellbeing or terms for. Might sound semantic, but of course it's important, I think, for when we're thinking about using these measures to guide public policy decisions. And so I am delighted that actually there's work ongoing looking at evaluative measures on the one hand, and trying to capture experiences as people live and breathe their lives, and as England fans, are in pain after being beat by Argentina yesterday. And I've said that a few times because I think it's important, because I do think, again, sometimes policymakers and academics can be, I don't know, what's the word, a little bit elitist, a bit too cerebral. We do live and breathe and feel our lives, and we experience them, and we pay attention. That's the critical word that I use in Happiness by Design. Our lives are determined by what we pay attention to, and I do think, to some large degree, the measures that have gained prominence in the wellbeing research world are measures that we don't actually pay attention to very much when we experience our lives. I'm very rarely thinking about where my life sits on the best possible, worst possible life scale between 0 and 10. But I am experiencing pain, joy, anger, worry, stress, excitement, sadness, every single moment of every single minute that I live. And so, again, it's encouraging that we're measuring all of these things. But I would, and you might expect me to say this if anyone has read Happiness by Design of what I've written since, but that we should be paying much more attention to those direct experiential measures. I'm very pleased that the OECD, Jessica's on this call, I see, so I don't feel obliged to say this, but maybe she's prompted me definitely to remind everybody that we've just written some updated OECD guidance on measuring affect, where we recommend using measures or incorporating more on meaning, loneliness, pain. And here's an important one: joy. It's a very interesting question. I like actually many people to think about this. If I asked you the question, what do you do for joy? I find it really interesting question to ask policymakers and academics, because a lot of people will give, again, very kind of cerebral thing. Oh, well, I'm learning the piano, or I'm learning to. Oh, no. I'm not saying what you're doing that is meaningful and purposeful. What do you actually do for joy, purely in and of itself? And actually, a lot of people can't come up with an answer to that question, which is, I think, partly a sad indictment of the way in which we organize society, but of the way in which we live. So I want to make a case for not only affect, but actually, really, the richness of what it means to live well. And I think we can sometimes get misdirected in that by looking too closely at the evaluative measures and not closely enough at how people feel moment to moment. And that was really my main contribution that I wanted to make this morning in 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Really appreciate it. We'll just give straight over now to Jessica as our third panelist. So Jessica Mahoney is a policy analyst at the OECD Center on Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability and Equal Opportunity, and lead author of the 2025 update of the OECD guidelines on measuring subjective wellbeing, the guidelines that shape how statistical offices worldwide collect this data. Jessica, over to you. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much. And I'm assuming the sharing has gone properly.
Yes.
So thanks so much. I'm going to take a slightly different tack from Arthur and Paul and kind of how I reflect on this. So I'm a policy analyst at the OECD Center on Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability, and Equal Opportunity, or WAIS. We're similar to WISER, but not the same. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how we think about collecting data on well-being, very much in reflection and conversation with the presentations that we saw. So the work that we do at the WISE Center and my team does is thinking about how to measure well-being, but then also how you can use those data in meaningful ways. So just very quickly to kind of, as Arthur was saying, sort of put your policy hat on, why do we even care about this in the first place? So the OECD has a long history of promoting well-being. We view subjective well-being as sort of a subcomponent of a broader multidimensional approach to measuring what matters for people, planet, and future generations. So it includes objective material conditions, but also all of the subjective assessments that people make about their lives. And the OECD's view is that these subjective measures are an important complement to traditional measures of progress. So they provide a fuller picture and a better understanding of a lot of these complex challenges that people and governments are facing, things like the digital transition or geopolitical conflict, changing climates, and so on. Just at the OECD, we see subjective well-being measures popping up in OECD policy analysis and advice. And I put a few examples here on the screen. So thinking about education policy, improving student skills in the school environment, that stream of work includes subjective well-being measures, how students feel about their lives, their socio-emotional skills, their sense of belonging in the school place, etc. Then also healthcare, improving patient outcomes. So patient-reported outcomes are used to assess healthcare in one measure. And then the third point, just to make here before going into the more specifics, at WISE, we also give policymakers guidance for next steps once you collect well-being data, what you do with it. And here are just a few high-level examples of how these data can be integrated into the policymaking process. And this can be true for subjective well-being data as well. So to encourage national statistical offices, but really any data producer, to collect data on these different well-being topics, at the OECD, we produce measurement guidelines, and this is what Paul mentioned. So we just produced an update of our guidelines on measuring subjective well-being, and Paul was involved in that, as was Connell. So this is a great panel for advertising this work. And we focus our guidelines work on areas where official data producers traditionally haven't been as active. So that is things like trust, you see here, social connections, population mental health, and then, of course, subjective well-being. So on the right here, you see our core module of 3 priority subjective well-being measures. So it includes this life satisfaction question you've seen a lot, also a question about meaning and pain, which Paul alluded to. And of course, the guidelines itself has a lot of other modules. There's a lot more information in there if you're interested. But essentially, we design them to be a useful toolkit to data producers. So if you're interested in measuring it, it's sort of ready to go. You can take this and slot it into an existing survey. We try to design it so that it can be slotted into different types of surveys, different survey modes and formats. But very much, this is designed for a traditional survey, which is what I want to kind of now segue into. So most of the subjective well-being data that you see globally as part of the global evidence base comes from a household survey. And household surveys are facing a growing number of challenges. So there have always been issues with household surveys, or not so much issues, but there are these constraints that you have to deal with as a data producer. But there's been further pressure, I would say, in recent years. Widespread digitization of communications, changing communication norms, people using call screenings, reluctance among respondents to share personal data, so the sense of trust, growth in the deployment of surveys, both public and commercial bodies, so there's more and more survey fatigue, changing survey modes, operational factors, internal resourcing constraints. So just to say, there are a lot of issues facing household surveys. So this is not unique to subjective well-being. It's true for any data that's collected in a survey, but it's something that's very front of mind now among our stakeholders and in conversations we have is kind of how to ensure robustness of data. And we care about this very much in the subjective well-being space because so much of the data currently comes from household surveys. And if it's not coming from a household survey, as Talita made the point, these innovative methods are using the household surveys to validate and benchmark. So this is just an illustration looking at long-run decline in response rates in some household surveys. So this is for 2 UK surveys, the UK Labour Force Survey. There's been quite a lot in the news about some of those issues with response rates. Also in the US, these are just examples, but this is true kind of across the board. Again, not specific to subjective well-being, but very much relevant for subjective well-being. And then one of the concerns, of course, is that the declining response rates, it's non-random. And so we're worried about the representativeness of the people who are still participating in the surveys. Again, this is just an illustrative example from Scotland, but you can look and see here that younger adults are becoming less and less represented in these surveys, whereas older adults are becoming more and more representative. And then similarly, people from ethnic backgrounds are becoming less representative. So this is something that we need to think about. Well-targeted social policies need to have a good understanding of the actual needs of the population. So it's a concern if surveys are no longer as representative as we assume that they are. And then this is also coupled with changing survey modes. So we have some existing evidence from Paul, who we just heard from, that subjective well-being outcomes are higher if people are responding to the survey over the phone compared to in person. It's less clear, the shift to online data collection, what that means when you compare it to phone versus in-person surveys. There's some mixed findings there. But then there's also some questions about what increasing use of mixed mode surveys will mean for survey responses. And then there's newer research that's looking into how survey mode might interact with age, or maybe not so much age, but generational cohorts, which can lead to different age distribution patterns in subjective well-being. So looking at, are young people the happiest, the U-shaped curve, or are they actually the least happy? And survey mode might be playing a role in that, how they interact with survey mode. And then also this question about representativeness, depending on survey mode, if you have fewer young people, if you're using a certain type of survey mode or not. So just to say, these are lots of caveats and concerns. And so these are some things in listening to Martin's presentation that I'm sort of curious when you're collating data from all of your recycling. I like that word, data recycling. Obviously, there's a lot of statistical smoothing and harmonization that is happening, but how you think about dealing with these types of issues, because that would be quite instructive, I think, to understand more. And then one final layer is just this transformational role of AI and artificial intelligence. We're seeing that there's already some national statistical offices who are producing and disseminating official statistics with AI. And obviously, in unofficial statistics, this is very much something that's happening already. So here on the left, these are some examples from the Irish and French statistical offices, some examples of how they're using AI, and it's primarily for classifying text responses, processing open-ended questions. So these examples are not specifically for subjective well-being, but I think it's very clear how you could apply this to new ways of collecting data on subjective well-being. Then on the right, this is a presentation from the IMF, but it's discussing a really important fact for any producer of data, which is that the end user is changing. So it's no longer the case that a user is navigating to your website or to your report and accessing the data themselves or looking at a table and interpreting the data. Instead, it's increasingly people who are using AI chatbots to ask a question in natural language, and then the AI is accessing the data on the back end and repackaging it and giving it to the user. So there's a question then, if that's how people are expecting to engage with statistics, how do you as the data producer ensure that your data is accessible to AI so that it's included then, but also how you can ensure that important contextual information like the metadata, et cetera, is traveling with it. So that's very front of mind right now for stats offices, is thinking about this. And it's perhaps a bit tangential, but I think related to Talita's, I'm curious. So obviously one of the issues with using big data in the way is sort of, if you have changes to the platform that you're using, you have to then pivot, which you've shown an example of doing previously using Twitter. Now you've pivoted to Google Trends. But as the way people interact with Google changes, a lot of people, and I would anticipate, it's non-random and it's also probably age related. More people aren't Googling things; they're instead just going directly through AI chatbots. And so, what that means then for something like the work that you're doing. Before I finish, though, I just want to say I know I've perhaps been slightly critical of surveys, but surveys are very much a key resource. They are the key resource for us at the OECD. Still the first best method for collecting data on subjective well-being and other data about people's perceptions and intentions. And very importantly, and Talita made this point many times, so I'm glad, they're also the benchmark for validating new tools. So it's really important, even as we attempt to innovate in this space, that we still make sure we're expending the right amount of resources to make sure surveys continue to be done in a very rigorous method, so that we have high quality data from them. But there is a question of how to make sure they're sort of cost effective and efficient, and maybe we can sort of harmonize with new ways to be, I guess, more efficient in resource allocation. And then as a last note, just to say that, despite the fact that the OECD, we spend a lot of time talking to NSOs or national statistical offices on survey data, we are doing some experimentation with different types of novel data collection methods. And Talita mentioned this paper, which is the lead author is one of my colleagues at C.WAIS, Fabrice, which is looking at nowcasting subjective well-being using Google Trends data. So that's something that we're also doing ourselves at the OECD. So I will leave it there for the sake of time, and happy to talk more after.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I'm going to jump over to the third discussant and then we can, or the fourth discussant, sorry, and then we can open the full floor for some questions. So the fourth discussant is Connell Smith, Principal Economist at Kotata Insight in Wellington, a former manager of social conditions at Statistics New Zealand, and formerly a senior economist at OECD, where he led the development of the first international guidelines on measuring subjective well-being and trust. Connell, over to you.
Thanks so much, Frederick, and thank you, just a huge thank you to both the authors of the Talita and Stephanie, and the authors of the first article, and to Martijn and company for the second article. Like Arthur, I am a huge fan of data. You can't do anything without good data. Right. Hopefully that's present. Yep, being shared. Right. So going quickly through this. Data is important, and big data is particularly important. Quantity has a quality all of its own. It's a great quote, usually attributed to Napoleon or Stalin, although in fact I think if you dig, it's some mostly nameless American think tank official in the 70s who actually said it first. But it's something that should have been said by someone like Napoleon or Stalin. So when we think about how wellbeing data is used in policy, I'm going to take an actual example that was given to me by High Performance Sport New Zealand a few years back, which is how much is an Olympic gold medal worth? This segue ties very well to Talita's presentation. You go away and look at the economic literature on this, cost-benefit analysis type measures. Almost all of them use a contingent valuation model, asking you how much would you be willing to pay for country to get a gold medal. And obviously there are a bunch of limitations associated with that. Some methodological and some just cost related, right? So it's expensive to do. You go out, you get a small sample. There was this one study, which I'm about to dump all over, but in fact the authors did exactly the right thing. Humphreys, Johnson and Whitehead. They, in addition to doing contingent valuation, did a well-being valuation. However, their well-being valuation didn't work very well. It was a smallish one-off survey. So N equals 3,000, which is not too bad, but not large. And it was designed, kind of tacked on to the end of this thing. So it wasn't really rigorous. So it was missing two of the key features that both the two presentations of today have talked about. It wasn't large, and it wasn't well validated against other measures. And the result was when they got it, I don't know if you can see down there in the corner, but the values they got for a gold medal were about 10 times higher, between 10 and 1,000 times higher, 100 times higher than anyone else's. And the values they got for non-gold medals were actually negative. So it didn't work. When we went back and had a look at it using data from the New Zealand Household Economics Survey, which when pulled together, we had about 63,000 observations. So 20 times as much. And we also had high quality data. So the HES is a national survey, good response rates, good question. And the values you can see that come out of this are much more reasonable and much more in line with other things. So the key point which comes here is that the quality of the data you're working with matters, and many of the policy issues we're going to want to look at with wellbeing data are issues where noise to signal ratio is a real challenge. So to deal with that, we want big data sets. So a few comments in on both these. So the gist of that is that both these two projects, Talita, Martin, you're doing God's work. Okay, this is the right thing to do. A few reflections on the two programs or two papers. Firstly, Talita's paper. So nowcasting, it addresses lag, the 1 to 2 year time frame. It addresses the frequency at which it can be updated, right? So you can get weekly things, and it addresses sample size. You can get a very large sample size out of it. For all of these reasons, I think that the big data approach is worth doing. A few thoughts. Firstly, the use of PANAS to shape the words that you use, the affect terms you're doing. So one of the things that came up in the project which Jessica mentioned, I was looking at non-Western, globally inclusive measures of subjective well-being. Every affect term in PANAS essentially is individually focused. I can be living alone on a desert island and I can feel happy or depressed or sad or angry or stressed. And most of the affect measures and most of the words we're working with sit there. I'd be interested, partly because I don't know the answer to this, what happens if you start using terms that relate to affect or emotion that are relational, that are purely individual? Guilt, shame, compassion, respect. So once you start thinking about these things, there's a whole lot of emotions that have a social context. I think that would be very interesting in this to explore in this sort of approach. Secondly, any nowcasting that I've seen from previous ones has a half-life once you get to out-of-sample prediction. So you model it on, you train your data on true happiness. Once you stop training it and you take that data and start predicting going forwards without updating it, over time the R-squared is likely to erode. That's not a bad thing. We expect that to happen. But for the policymaker using one of these measures, it would be really helpful to know what is the quality of the data if it hasn't been up, if your underlying model hasn't been updated for 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, 2 years. I think this is particularly for these nowcast models, that the sort of half-life of R squared on your out of sample is of really high value to the user. Finally, validation strategies. So when you designed this, you looked at true happiness over time. It would be really useful to validate it by looking at same base data, UK true happiness, but looking at the degree to which your measure reflects cross-country geographic differences. So you've got a 1-point difference in your over time sample. The difference cross-country is actually about twice that. And since you've trained it on the time series, if it works well at a geographic level, that's a really strong validity signal. For what it's worth, the best and worst areas in the UK, true happiness, are Brighton Beach in the south and the Shetland Islands in the north. Martine, harmonising large-scale survey data. So high frequency regional panel data has real value in testing public policy impacts. EU has potential to generate natural experiments, different national policies, but borders are porous. So high quality, updated regional data time series, hugely valuable. I'm really quite optimistic about the conceptual differences in measure not being an issue. When we did the first guidelines on trust, we got the ONS to test a few of these and split sample trials. and found the differences between, say, overall happiness and overall life satisfaction were trivial if they existed at all. Two things to suggest. One, like Arthur, I think you want to consider looking at Eurobarometer quite hard. Mapping 4-point to 10-point is non-trivial, and I suspect that's part of the reason why your Eurobarometer average is 6.3 and all your other measures are above that. Secondly, in the Eurobarometer data, at least through to 2000, there are significant changes in question order, with sort of political questions getting dropped in right before the life satisfaction question and then taken out. And in the pre-2000 data, these unambiguously have a big effect on life satisfaction in particular years. Really good to test that. Finally, of course, 4-point scale actually has less statistical power than a 10-point scale. This is a really trivial thing. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone do it, but I'd be interested in thinking, is it worthwhile weighting observations based on this scale? Because my guess is that 1,000 0 to 10-point responses have more statistical power than 1,000 1 to 4 responses. Finally, my last point, and then we can talk. So there's already a large-scale regional data set in the EU. EU Silk, which is annual since 2021, has an annual sample size roughly twice the sample you've assembled. This doesn't mean I think assembling the sample is a bad idea for two reasons. One, the EU Silk sample is recent, and for policy, a 20-year time frame is fantastic. And two, Eurostat doesn't really make this available as panel data at the moment, but it would be really interesting. The data exists to directly test the panel you've built, which is easily available, against harmonized national statistics with a similar, actually slightly larger annual sample size. And again, that would be a really good validation strategy. Okay, I'll shut up now and hand it back to the chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Connell. I really appreciate it. I would like to give now maybe a few minutes just to wrap up, to give to Talita and Martijn to maybe give some feedback based on the discussant's comments, and then I'll see if there's any questions in the chat box, and then I'll intervene to maybe give those questions. But I'd like to give the last minute or so to Talita and Martijn to provide feedback or response based on the discussant's comments. Thank you very much. Martijn or Talita, either one of you can go first. I'm not sure. Just unmute Talita. Sorry, yes. Then.
There we go. I'm unmuted.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much to the discussants. I mean, to see these well-renowned academia and to get their comments is amazing. There were a few comments. Let me just answer them and look at them. Different cultures and how they understand the words. This is my next project, and I've already climbed into it and done some research. Very interesting. Definitely words, these type of effect words and much more on cognitive is not the same in different cultural areas. You will see more of this soon. Then correlations between the different countries. I must really tell you there have been cross correlations between the countries. What we've done is we've done a few difference in difference and event studies where we specifically look at an event and how it influenced the panel of data that we have with the different countries. And we had good results on that. Also already published papers with an external event that affects emotions. So definitely you see those shocks very clearly that you probably won't see in life satisfaction. A quick look at what else did you ask? Correlations. And the policy importance of experienced well-being. I think Paul Dalen highlighted quite a few of them. And I think Prof. Richard Layard agrees that there should be more focus on the side of experienced well-being, because it's not just an outcome, but it's also basically a leading indicator showing how people react to certain events. We just looked at something like compliance, If the people's not happy with what you say, and you can see it in their mood, they're not going to comply. So that was another research we did, definitely having policy impact. I think that was it. Remind me if there's any other questions.
Okay, I think maybe we can go over to Martijn and then we can hear
Yes,
if there's any more.
and I'm lucky now because somebody is drilling next to me, so like my neighbor. So if I get disturbed in that process, then sorry for that. So many thanks for these many thoughtful comments. I'll just like briefly highlight a few. So like to start with the 1 to 4 skill. There the drilling starts again. With the 1 to 4 scale. So I agree that is the odd one out. And I think it has already been addressed in some others research. I think we start here from the survey data that has been harmonized by the recycling project in Poland, which uses like a simple linear transformation. We can indeed run a robustness check, leaving this data out, but that would also mean like dropping considerable number of observations. At the same time, we could also look at different scaling or transition that has been it's difficult to concentrate with the drilling. So there has been, like in the 2010s, particularly Ruth Veenhoven and the Dutch National Statistics, because the Netherlands also used initially the 1 to 4 scale, have been conducting some studies on how to translate this 1 to 4 scale into a 1 to 10 or a 0 to 10 scale. So it would be worthwhile to look into this literature and to see to what extent also like rescaling according to the Eurobarometer data, according to these type of measurements, would matter for our findings. The validation suggested by Connell, I think it's wonderful to test this against the national survey data that is out there to do a validation study, and also using the EU Silk would be great. With regard to Jessica's comment, yes, that's a very important point regarding representativeness. I was shocked to see on how the representative also declines and response rate decline, and in particular that it leaves some groups also like very unrepresented in survey data. That having said that, like by pooling data, I think that we try to come to more representative data for European regions. At the same time, that doesn't mean that all groups in society are equally well represented, and which also means that this data probably cannot always very well use for like, for example, specific policy evaluation that target these specific groups that are probably vulnerable, but at the same time represented in this data. For regard to like some of the data features, it's important like to mention the data set comes indeed with also the number of observations per region year that we have. And also comes not only with the average subjective well-being, but also with a standard deviation measure and precision indicator. So that is also what you can utilize as a user for this data. I'll stop here.